The basement smelled like mildew and forgotten things, which was exactly why Lyra preferred it to anywhere else in the pack house. Down here, in the cold darkness beneath the floorboards where the rest of the Crescent Moon Pack lived their normal lives, no one bothered her. No one stared. No one whispered about the crazy Omega who talked to things that weren't there. She sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, her thin dress doing little to protect her from the chill, but she didn't mind. The cold was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. "You're quieter today," Lyra whispered to the shadow pooling in the corner. The one that always seemed deeper than the others. More substantial somehow. Did something happen? The shadow rippled, and she heard it. Not with her ears exactly, but somewhere deeper. In the place where her wolf should have been strong, but had always felt different. Strange. Like it was connected to something the others couldn't touch. The voice came like wine through leaves, like water over stones. "Danger comes. The Ancient One stirs. You must prepare." Lyra wrapped her arms around herself. The shadows had been agitated for weeks now, their usual whispers turning urgent, almost frantic. She didn't fully understand what they meant by the Ancient One, but their fear was palpable. And if beings as old as they claimed to be were afraid, that terrified her. "I don't know how to prepare," she said softly. "No one listens to me. They think I'm broken." "You are not broken, child. You are awakening." But the response did little to comfort her. Awakening to what? To more isolation? To deeper madness in the eyes of her pack? The door at the top of the basement stairs crashed open, and Lyra flinched, her heart hammering. Heavy footsteps descended, multiple sets, and she scrambled to her feet, pressing herself against the wall. Alpha Marcus appeared first, his face set in its usual expression of disgust whenever he looked at her. Behind him came 3 wolves she didn't recognize, but their power was unmistakable. These were not ordinary pack members. These were apex predators, and the one in the center made her wolf whimper and press close to her spine. He was tall, broader than Marcus, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes that seemed to hold storms. He wore authority like a second skin, and when his gaze swept the basement and landed on her, Lyra felt the impact like a physical blow. Those eyes, silver gray and ancient, widened slightly. He had heard her. Somehow, impossibly, he had heard her speaking to the shadows. "This is her?" the stranger asked, his voice deep and resonant, the kind of voice that commanded armies. "This is the one you told me about?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "She's defective, Your Majesty. Talks to herself, claims to see things. We've kept her separated from the rest of the pack for everyone's safety. Your Majesty." The words registered slowly in Lyra's mind. This was the Alpha King, Cale Thorne, ruler of the Northern Territories, the most powerful werewolf in generations. And he was staring at her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Cale moved closer, and his companions, a stern-faced woman with silver streaks in her dark hair and a younger male who radiated barely controlled violence, remained by the stairs. "What's your name?" he asked Lyra directly, ignoring Marcus entirely. She hesitated, unused to being addressed with anything resembling respect. "Lyra," she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Lyra Ashworth." He studied her for a long moment, and she resisted the urge to look away from that penetrating gaze. "Lyra, I heard you speaking when we entered. Who were you talking to?" The question was asked gently, without mockery or accusation, and it startled her so much she answered honestly. "The shadows. They warn me about things, about danger coming." Marcus made a scoffing sound. "See? Completely unstable." But Cale held up, silencing him without even looking in his direction. "What do the shadows tell you, Lyra?" His use of her name, the way he said it like it mattered, like she mattered, made something crack in her chest. "They say the Ancient One is waking," she whispered. "They say we need to prepare, that darkness is coming for all of us." The female wolf behind Cale inhaled sharply, and the younger male's expression shifted from boredom to sharp attention. Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "When did they start telling you this?" "Weeks ago, but they've been talking to me my whole life. Since I was 5. She expected dismissal, expected him to turn away like everyone else always did. Instead, Cale did something that shocked everyone in that basement. He knelt, lowering himself so he was closer to her eye level. A king humbling himself before an Omega that others called mad. Lyra, the shadows you speak to, they're not hallucinations. They're real. They're called the umbral kindred, ancient spirits that exist between our world and the void. They haven't chosen a speaker in over 300 years. His words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Only those with very specific bloodlines can communicate with them, bloodlines we thought were extinct. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand. The moment his skin met hers, power surged between them, a recognition so profound it drove the breath from her lungs. Mate, the word resonated, through every cell in her body, through the strange, different wolf inside her, through the very shadows that began to writhe and gather around them both. Cale's eyes darkened, his wolf rising to the surface, and she knew he felt it too. Impossible. Marcus breathed, staring at them. She can't be. Not her. But Cale wasn't looking at Marcus. He was looking at Lyra like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. "You're coming with me," he said. Not a command, but a statement of absolute certainty. "To the capital. We need your gift, Lyra. The Umbral Kindred chose you for a reason. And if they're warning about the Ancient One, then the Shadowborn is rising, and you might be the only one who can help us stop it." Lyra's mind reeled. Mate. Gift. The Shadowborn. It was too much. Too fast. "I don't understand," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I'm nobody. I'm just the crazy Omega who talks to things that aren't there." Cale's hand tightened gently on hers. "You are my mate. You are a Speaker-born, one of the rarest bloodlines in our history, and you are coming with me tonight, because I am not leaving you in this basement for one more second." The certainty in his voice, the conviction, it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Marcus sputtered protests about pack protocol and Omega status, but Cale rose to his full height, still holding Lyra's hand, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "She is under my protection now. Anyone who has mistreated her, anyone who has called her broken or mad, they answer to me. Are we clear, Alpha Marcus?" The venom in that title made Marcus pale. "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect." Cale's lip curled. "You meant every disrespect, and we both know it. Gather whatever belongings you have, Lyra. We leave within the hour. Before you continue reading, if you're enjoying this story of finding power in what others called madness, and discovering that the one who truly sees you might be your greatest destiny, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Comment below what you think the Shadowborn might be, and whether you believe Lyra can learn to trust the Alpha King who sees her truth. Your support helps us bring you more supernatural romance stories that prove your differences might be your greatest strength. The journey to the northern capital took 3 days, and Lyra spent most of it in a state of disbelief. She rode in Kyle's personal vehicle, a sleek black SUV that smelled like pine and winter storms, and something uniquely him that made her wolf purr despite her fear. The female wolf, who introduced herself as Commander Saskia, Cale's head of security, sat in front with the driver. The younger male, a warrior named Jaren, followed in a second vehicle with additional guards. Cale sat beside Lyra in the back, giving her space, but remaining close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the magnetic pull of the mate. Bond that she had no idea how to handle. "Tell me about the shadows," Cale said on the second day, after Lyra had spent hours in silence, watching the landscape change from the familiar forests of her old pack territory to the dramatic mountains of the north. "What do they look like to you? How do they communicate?" Lyra hesitated, old habits of silence and self-protection warring with his genuine interest. "They're darker than normal shadows," she finally said. "Thicker somehow, like they have substance. And they move even when nothing casts them. The voices come like feelings first, emotions, and then they translate into words in my mind. Different shadows have different voices. Some are older, wiser. Some are playful. Some are sad. Kyle nodded, processing this. The texts about Speakerborn are ancient and fragmented, but they say the umbral kindred are the remnants of the first wolves, the ones who walked between light and darkness, before the world settled into what it is now. They're not ghosts exactly, but not fully corporeal either. They exist in the spaces between, and they can see things we can't, know things we don't. He turned to look at her fully. The fact that they're warning you about the Shadowborn is significant. It means they trust you. It means they chose correctly. What is the Shadowborn? Lyra asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since the basement. Kale's expression darkened. A creature from the old times, before the packs. Organized, before we had laws and territories. The Shadowborn was a wolf who tried to merge with the void itself, to become one with the darkness to gain ultimate power. The ritual nearly succeeded, but our ancestors managed to bind it, to lock it away in a prison between worlds. But prisons don't last forever, especially magical ones. We've had reports of strange occurrences across all territories. Shadows moving on their own, people seeing things in the darkness, entire packs reporting. Nightmares of a hunger that wants to consume everything. Lyra shivered. The shadows told me it stirs. They said the bindings are weakening, which is why we need you, Saskia said from the front seat, meeting Lyra's eyes in the rearview mirror. If the umbral kindred are communicating with you, you might be able to learn how to strengthen the bindings, or at least give us warning before the Shadowborn breaks free completely. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on Lyra's shoulders. But I don't know how to do any of this. I've spent my whole life being told I was crazy. I don't know how to be what you need. Kale's hand found hers again, that electric connection sparking between them. Then we'll learn together. The capital has the largest archive of ancient knowledge in all territories. We'll research. We'll train. We'll figure it out. You're not alone anymore, Lyra. The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked quietly. You're the Alpha King. I'm just an Omega from a minor pack. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. You're my mate. You're Speakerborn. And even if you were neither of those things, no one deserves to be treated the way your pack treated you. Gifts that others don't understand aren't madness, Lyra. They're often the very things that save us all. The northern capital was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Built into the mountainside, it was a sprawling complex of stone and timber, ancient and modern architecture blending seamlessly. Wolves moved through the streets with purpose. Merchants called out their wares, and the air hummed with a vitality that made her old pack seem gray and lifeless by comparison. The royal palace sat at the highest point, a massive structure that seemed to grow from the mountain itself, all soaring towers and fortified walls. Kyle led her through corridors filled with wolves who stopped and stared, whispers following in their wake. Lyra kept her eyes down, old habits reasserting themselves, until Kale stopped walking and gently tilted her chin up with his fingers. You walk beside a king now, he said softly. Head up, Lyra. You have nothing to be ashamed of. The words were easier said than internalized, but she tried, forcing herself to meet the curious and sometimes hostile gazes of the court wolves. He brought her to a suite of rooms that were larger than the entire space she'd been allowed in her old pack house. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the mountains. Thick carpets covered gleaming wood floors, and the bathroom alone was bigger than the basement she'd called home. This is too much, Lyra said, overwhelmed. I don't need all this. Kale smiled, and it transformed his face from imposing to devastating. You're the king's mate. This is actually one of the smaller suites, but I wanted you close to my quarters, and I wanted you to have space to breathe, to adjust. There's a library through that door, a private one, filled with texts about Speakerborn and the umbral kindred. I thought you might want to read without an audience. The thoughtfulness of it, the careful consideration of what she might need, made emotion clog her throat. Thank you, she managed. Kale reached out and tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, the gesture tender. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we begin your training, and I introduce you formally to the court. It won't be easy, Lyra. There will be those who question your place here, who see an Omega from nowhere and assume the worst. But I stand with you. Always. The mate bond thrummed between them, and Lyra felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night, alone in her beautiful new rooms, Lyra stood by the window and watched the shadows gather. They were stronger here, more present, and their voices came clearer than ever before. Speaker, we are pleased. The king sees truth. He will help you become what you must be. What must I be? She asked the darkness. The answer came from multiple voices, layering over each other in a harmony that was both beautiful and eerie. Bridge, warrior, savior. You carry the old blood, the line of the first Shadow Walker. The Shadowborn was your ancestors' mistake. You will be the one to end it. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. My ancestor created the Shadowborn. Yes, Lyandra Shadowwalker, the first to attempt the merge with the void. She failed, became the monster. But before she fell, she had children. Your line carries her power, uncorrupted. You can walk the paths between light and dark without being consumed. This is why we chose you. This is why you must succeed where she failed. Lyra sank to the floor, her mind reeling. Her bloodline had created the very threat now endangering everyone. The weight of that legacy was crushing. A knock at her door made her jump. Lyra, may I come in? Kale's voice concerned. She considered pretending to be asleep, but the mate bond betrayed her emotional turmoil, and she knew he could feel it. Yes, she called out, her voice unsteady. He entered, dressed more casually now in dark pants and a simple shirt, his hair slightly damp like he'd just showered. His eyes found her on the floor by the window, and he was beside her in seconds. What happened? I felt your distress. Lyra looked up at him, this powerful king who had upended her entire world in a matter of days. The shadows told me the truth. The Shadowborn. The monster we have to stop. It was created by my ancestor, Lyandra Shadowwalker. I'm descended from the very thing that's trying to destroy us. She waited for horror, for rejection, for him to realize that taking her as a mate was a mistake. Instead, Kale sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Then you're also descended from someone powerful enough to attempt merging with the void. Someone whose bloodline has survived centuries carrying that power without being corrupted by it. Lyra, this doesn't make you responsible for an ancestor's mistake. It makes you uniquely qualified to fix it. She wanted to believe him. What if I have her darkness in me? What if I try to use this power and become like her? Kale turned, framing her face with his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Then I'll be there to pull you back. That's what mates do. We balance each other. We anchor each other. Your power doesn't scare me, Lyra. The thought of you facing this alone scares me. But together we can do this. The conviction in his voice, the absolute certainty. It broke through her fear. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. A gesture of trust, of connection. Kale's breath caught, and his arms came around her, holding her like she was something precious. I've waited my whole life for you, he murmured against her hair. I won't let the darkness take you. I promise. And surrounded by shadows that hummed their approval, held by a king who saw power where others saw madness, Lyra began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than the broken Omega she'd always thought she was. The formal introduction to the court was every bit as difficult as Kyle had warned. The throne room was packed with nobility from across the territories, all curious about the king's sudden claim of finding his mate. Lyra stood beside Kale's throne, wearing a dress that Saskia had helped her choose, deep midnight blue that made her pale skin luminous, and her dark hair shine. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but Kale's presence beside her was a steady anchor. This is unprecedented. Lord Corvain, an older wolf with silver hair and cold eyes, said loudly enough for the entire room to hear. An Omega from a minor pack, with no credentials, no bloodline of note. Surely, Your Majesty, you cannot expect us to accept this as a true mate bond. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Lyra felt shame begin to creep up her spine. But then, Kale stood, and the room fell silent. "What I expect," he said, his voice cutting through the space like a blade, "is respect for your king and his mate. Lyra is speaker-born, one of the rarest and most powerful bloodlines in our history. She communicates with the umbral kindred, and they have chosen her as their speaker for the first time in 3 centuries. Her bloodline is directly descended from the Shadow Walker line, which makes her nobility far more ancient than most families in this room." The revelation caused an uproar. Shadow Walker was a name from legends, from the oldest stories. Lady Meridian, a wolf known for her political maneuvering, stood with a calculating look. If she truly is speaker-born, let her prove it. Let her command the shadows before us all. It was a trap, Lyra realized. If she failed, she would be exposed as a fraud. If she succeeded, she would terrify half the wolves in this room. Cale looked at her, a question in his eyes. It was her choice. Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding. She had never tried to deliberately call the shadows before. They had always come to her on their own terms. But now, with hundreds of eyes on her, she closed her eyes and reached out with that strange, different part of herself that had always felt wrong. She thought of the voices, the presences that had been her only companions for so long. She asked, not commanded, "Please, help me show them the truth." The response was immediate. The shadows in the throne room, cast by chandeliers and bodies and pillars, began to move. They stretched and writhed, detaching from their sources, pooling together in the center of the room. Gasps and cries of alarm filled the air as the darkness coalesced into vaguely humanoid shapes. Dozens of them. The umbral kindred, manifesting in a display of power that hadn't been seen in living memory. The speaker has called, and we answer. Their voices echoed through the minds of everyone present. Not just Lyra. She is ours as we are. Hers. She carries the old blood, uncorrupted and pure. Any who doubt her doubt the ancient pact itself. The shadows dispersed as quickly as they'd gathered, leaving the throne room in stunned silence. Lyra swayed, the effort of the calling draining her, but Cale was there instantly, his arm around her waist, supporting her. "Does anyone else wish to question my mate's legitimacy?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. No one spoke. Lord Corvain looked like he'd swallowed something sour, and Lady Meridian's calculating expression had shifted to wary respect. "Then this matter is settled," Cale declared. "Lyra Ashworth is my mate and your future queen. She will be treated with the respect and honor that position demands. This audience is concluded." He swept Lyra out of the throne room before her legs could give out completely, carrying her once they were out of sight of the court. "That was incredible," he said, awe in his voice. "Do you have any idea how powerful you are?" Lyra leaned, her head against his shoulder, exhausted, but also exhilarated. For the first time in her life, she'd used her gift and been met with respect instead of ridicule. "I'm starting to understand," she whispered. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of training and discovery. Cale had assigned her a team that included Saskia, who taught her combat and self-defense, an elderly scholar named Thaddeus, who helped her research speaker-born history, and a mage named Orion, who understood magical theory. Together, they worked to help Lyra understand and control her abilities. She learned that the umbral kindred weren't just messengers, but could be allies in battle, that she could use shadows to hide, to travel short distances, to shield herself and others. She learned that her connection to the void didn't make her evil, but gave her insight into a realm most wolves couldn't perceive, and through it all, her bond with Cale deepened. He trained with her, researched beside her, and slowly, carefully, courted her. He brought her books he thought she'd enjoy, took her on walks through the mountain gardens, and listened when she talked about her past pain, with a patience that made her trust him more each day. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never demanded the physical completion of the mate bond, though she could see the restraint it required in the tension of his shoulders, the heat in his eyes when he looked at her. "Why are you waiting?" she asked him one evening as they sat in her private library, books spread around them. "The mate bond. I know you feel the pull. Why haven't you claimed me?" Cale looked up from the ancient text he'd been studying. surprise flickering across his face at her directness. "Because you've spent your whole life having your choices taken from you," he said simply. "Your pack decided you were broken and treated you accordingly. They decided where you could go, what you could do, who you could be. I won't be another person who takes your agency. When we complete the bond, it will be because you choose it, freely and fully. Not because biology demands it or because I'm king and you feel you have no choice." The answer made her love him, though she wasn't quite ready to say the words. "What if I told you I'm ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I said I choose you, Kyle? Not because you're king, not just because you're my mate, but because you see me and you've never once made me feel like I need to be anything other than who I am." His eyes darkened, his wolf rising to the surface. "Then I would say that you have made me the happiest wolf alive." He crossed the space between them, and when he kissed her, it was like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. The completion of their mate bond was everything Lyra hadn't known she needed. Kale was gentle and passionate, reverent and wild, and when his teeth sank into her neck, marking her as his for all the world to see, she felt the final pieces of herself clicking into place. She marked him in return, and the bond snapped into full strength, a connection so profound she could feel his heartbeat as clearly as her own. In the aftermath, wrapped in his arms, she finally felt whole. But their happiness was short-lived. 3 days after their bonding, the attacks began. Packs across the territories reported wolves going mad, their eyes turning black as they attacked their own families. The shadows that protected became shadows that consumed. The Shadowborn was making its move, using its connection to the void to corrupt and destroy. Lyra felt each attack through the umbral kindred, their anguish at being twisted into weapons nearly breaking her. "It's getting stronger," she told Kale and the war council he'd assembled. "The bindings are failing faster than we thought. We have maybe weeks before it breaks free completely, and when it does, it won't just corrupt individuals. It will try to consume all light, turn the entire world into void." The council members, hardened warriors and experienced leaders, looked grim. "What do we do?" Saskia asked. "How do we fight something that exists between worlds?" Lyra took a deep breath. She'd been researching, reading the fragmented texts about her ancestor, and she'd found something. A ritual. Dangerous and possibly fatal. But their only option. Lyandra failed to merge with the void because she tried to take its power without balance. She wanted only darkness. But the old texts say that the void and the light are two halves of the same whole. They need each other to exist. If I can enter the void, if I can face the Shadowborn directly, I might be able to restore the balance, to heal what she broke. "Absolutely not," Kale said immediately, his voice brooking no argument. "You're talking about entering the realm that created that monster. It will try to consume you, corrupt you, just like it did her." Lyra reached for his hand. "I'm not Lyandra. I have something she didn't. I have you. I have a mate bond that anchors me to the light. The texts say that's the key. A shadow walker bound to a wolf of pure light, the sun to balance the moon. Kale, your bloodline. It's descended from the sun walkers, isn't it? The kings who could call the dawn?" Kale's jaw clenched. "That's legend. No one in my line has manifested that power in generations." Thaddeus cleared his throat, the old scholar looking between them with dawning realization. "But the potential is still there, dormant, and a true mate bond, especially one as powerful as yours. It could awaken dormant bloodline abilities. Your Majesty, she might be right. Together you might be able to do what Lyandra couldn't alone. Balance the void with light." The room erupted in debate, but Lyra kept her eyes on Kyle, watching the war between his protective instincts and his strategic mind. Finally he spoke. "If we do this, we do it together. I won't send you into that darkness alone." It wasn't agreement. Not quite. But it was acceptance that they might not have another choice. Lyra nodded. Together. Always. The preparation for the ritual took 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which the attacks intensified and the death toll rose. Lyra could feel the Shadowborn's presence growing stronger, could hear its hunger in the twisted whispers that invaded her dreams. It knew what she planned. It was waiting for her. The ritual required a convergence point, a place where the veil between worlds was thinnest. The ancient texts pointed to the obsidian cradle, a volcanic formation deep in the northern mountains where Lyanndra had first attempted her transformation. They traveled with a small group, just Kael, Saskia, Jaren, and Orion. The cradle was a massive bowl of black volcanic glass, sharp and gleaming under the moonlight. In its center was a pool of water so dark it looked like liquid night. "This is it," Orion confirmed, checking his magical instruments. "The veil is nearly transparent here. When you enter the water and begin the ritual, you'll be pulled into the void. Both of you." He looked at Kael seriously. "Your Majesty, you'll need to call on your bloodline, on the light that runs in your veins. If you can't, if the darkness overwhelms you both, we won't be able to pull you back." Kael pulled Lyra close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We've faced everything else together. This is no different." But they both knew it was. This was facing the primordial darkness, the hunger that wanted to unmake existence itself. Lyra and Kael stepped into the pool hand in hand. The water was ice cold, and immediately began to pull at them, drawing them down. Lyra began the chant Thaddeus had taught her, words in a language older than wolves, older than language itself. The world tilted, reality fractured, and they fell through the veil. The void was everything and nothing. It was hunger and silence, cold and emptiness, and at its center was the Shadowborn. It had once been a wolf, but now it was a massive creature of living darkness, all teeth and claws and malevolent intelligence. "You," it hissed when it saw Lyra, its voice like the death of stars. "Blood of my blood. You come to join me, to finish what I began." "No," Lyra said, her voice steady despite her terror. "I've come to end you, to restore the balance you destroyed." The Shadowborn laughed, and the sound was madness. "You cannot end me, child. I am eternal. I am the darkness that existed before light, and I will exist long after the last star dies." Kael stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and the monster. "You're a perversion of nature. Darkness needs light to give it meaning, just as light needs darkness. You're not eternal. You're just a mistake that's lasted too long." The Shadowborn's attention fixed on Kael, and its form seemed to grow larger, more terrible. "And what are you, little king? You reek of the old light, but you cannot command it. You are as powerless here as any mortal." Kael closed his eyes, and Lyra felt him reach deep inside himself through their bond, reaching for something that had slept for generations. When he opened his eyes again, they were glowing, pure white light pouring from them. His skin began to shine, and the darkness around them recoiled. "I am the son of the Sunwalkers," Kael said, his voice resonating with power, "and I claim my birthright." Light exploded from him, not destroying the darkness, but defining it, giving it boundaries, forcing it into form. The Shadowborn shrieked and attacked, a wave of consuming void rushing toward them. Lyra raised her hands and called the umbral kindred, the true shadows, the ones that existed in balance. They came, forming a barrier, but the Shadowborn was too strong, too vast. It began to overwhelm them, to pull them into itself. This is where Lyanndra failed, Lyra realized. She tried to control the darkness alone, but that's not how balance works. She reached for Kael through the bond, felt his light burning bright and strong, and instead of fighting the Shadowborn's pull, she embraced it. She let herself sink into the darkness, but she kept hold of Kael, kept that thread of light connected. Inside the Shadowborn, she found the core, the place where Lyanndra still existed, twisted and transformed, but not completely gone. She found the moment of her ancestors' choice, the instant where hunger had overcome wisdom, and she made a different choice. Lyra didn't try to control the darkness. She didn't try to destroy it. Instead, she offered it what it had always truly wanted: balance, completion. She channeled Kale's light through their bond and her own connection to shadow, weaving them together, showing the Shadowborn what it could have been if Lyandra had chosen differently. For a moment, the hunger paused. For a moment, the darkness remembered what it was like to exist alongside the light, complementing it, defining it, being defined by it. And in that moment, Lyra and Kale struck. Together they rewove the bindings, not as a prison this time, but as a transformation. They didn't trap the Shadowborn. They healed it, separated Lyandra's corrupted consciousness from the pure void, and returned both to their natural states. The darkness became shadow again, necessary and natural. Lyandra's spirit, finally freed from the monster she'd become, dissipated with a sigh that sounded like gratitude. The void shuddered. Reality reasserted itself, and Lyra and Kale were expelled from the between place, thrown back into their own world. They surfaced in the obsidian cradle gasping, clinging to each other, alive. Saskia and the others rushed to pull them from the pool, wrapping them in blankets, checking for injuries. "Is it done?" Orion asked urgently. "Did you succeed?" Kale and Lyra looked at each other, feeling through the bond, checking the shadows that now felt calmer, balanced. "It's done," Lyra confirmed. "The Shadowborn is gone. The balance is restored." The journey back to the capital was triumphant. Word spread quickly that the threat had been ended, that the king and his mate had achieved the impossible. The attack stopped. Wolves who had been corrupted by the Shadowborn's influence slowly recovered. The shadows returned to their natural state, and the umbral kindred sang their approval through Lyra's consciousness. But the true test came when they returned to the palace and the court assembled. To hear the full account, Lyra stood before them, no longer the frightened Omega who had hidden in basements, and told them everything. She told them about Lyandra, about the mistake that had created the Shadowborn, about how she and Kale had corrected it. She told them that darkness wasn't evil and light wasn't always good, that both were necessary, and that balance was what made their world possible. And when she finished, something unprecedented happened. The court, even Lord Corvain and ladies, Meridian, bowed to her, not just in acknowledgement of her position as queen, but in genuine respect for what she had accomplished. The coronation happened a month later. Lyra wore a crown of silver and obsidian, symbols of both light and shadow woven together. Kale crowned her himself, and when she rose as queen, the umbral kindred manifested briefly, a honor guard of shadows that had never been seen at any coronation before. It was a statement that the old powers, the ancient magic, recognized and approved of her rule. In the years that followed, Lyra transformed what it meant to be Speakerborn. She established an academy for those with unusual gifts, creating a place where wolves who might have been called broken or mad could learn to understand and control their abilities. She worked with the umbral kindred to maintain the balance between light and dark, becoming a bridge between the seen and unseen worlds. And she ruled beside Kale, their bond an example of how partnership, trust, and complementary strengths could create something stronger than either could achieve alone. She never forgot the basement where she'd been kept, the years of being told she was wrong, broken, crazy, but instead of letting that pain poison her, she used it as fuel to ensure no one else would suffer the same fate. Every wolf with a gift, no matter how strange or frightening, would have a place in her kingdom. Every shadow would be understood, not feared. And at night, when she and Kyle stood on their balcony overlooking the capital, the shadows gathered around them not as threats, but as friends, as allies, as proof that darkness could be beautiful when balanced with light. The umbral kindred whispered their approval, their voices a constant reminder that the broken Omega from the basement had become exactly what the world needed. A queen who walked between worlds, who understood that true strength came not from denying half of yourself, but from embracing all of who you were. Epilogue. 5 years after the fall of the Shadowborn, the northern capital thrived in ways that would have seemed impossible before Lyra's rise. The Speakerborn Academy had become renowned across all territories, drawing students from every pack who possessed gifts that had once been suppressed or feared. The building itself was a marvel of architecture, designed with input from the umbral kindred, featuring spaces where shadow and light played together in harmony, creating an environment where those sensitive to the void felt safe and understood. Lyra walked through the academy's main hall, her hand resting on the swell of her pregnant belly. After years of building their kingdom, of ensuring stability and peace, she and Kale had decided it was time to expand their family. The healers said twins, which both delighted and terrified her. Kale was convinced one would inherit her shadow gifts and one his light abilities, and he'd already started reading every text about bloodline inheritance he could find. Your Majesty, if you have a moment? A young wolf, barely 16, approached nervously. Her name was Mira, and she'd arrived at the academy 3 months ago, terrified and ashamed because she could hear the thoughts of plants. Her pack had called her delusional. Of course, Mira. How are your studies going? Lyra smiled encouragingly. The girl's face lit up. Wonderfully. Professor Thaddeus helped me understand that I'm not hearing thoughts exactly, but sensing the life energy of growing things. He thinks I might be a greenwalker, like the druids from the old stories. I can help things grow, heal sick plants, even encourage crops. My gift isn't useless. It could feed people. Lyra felt the familiar warmth in her chest that came from seeing someone discover their worth. That's incredible, Mira. Never forget that what others feared about you was actually your greatest strength. You just needed the right environment to bloom. The girl bowed, eyes shining with gratitude, and hurried off to her next class. These moments, Lyra thought, these were what made everything worthwhile. She found Kale in the war room, though these days it was used more for planning infrastructure and diplomatic missions than actual military strategy. The peace they'd forged had held, strengthened by Lyra's insistence that gifts like hers be shared, studied, and celebrated rather than hoarded or suppressed. Other territories had begun establishing their own schools, their own programs to identify and nurture unusual abilities. The whole world was changing. There you are, Kale said, immediately crossing to her and pressing a kiss to her forehead before kneeling to press another to her belly. How are my 3 favorite wolves? Your children are apparently training for acrobatics, Lyra said dryly. I think one just kicked the other. Kyle grinned, that devastating smile that still made her heart skip. Already establishing dominance. That's my line showing through. Saskia, now promoted to general and head of all northern forces, snorted from her position by the maps. Let's hope they get their mother's common sense to balance your tendency toward dramatic gestures. Kale clutched his chest in mock offense, and Lyra laughed. This, she thought, this was happiness. Not just the love of her mate, but the family they'd built, the court that had become true friends, the kingdom they'd shaped into something better. That evening, they held a celebration for the Academy's anniversary. The great hall was filled with students, teachers, families, and dignitaries from across the territories. Lyra gave a speech about the importance of seeing strength in difference, of celebrating the unique rather than fearing it. When she finished, the umbral kindred manifested, as they often did during significant moments, their shadowy forms dancing between the guests, playful and beautiful. A small child, one of the youngest students, reached out to touch one of the shadows, and, instead of recoiling in fear, she giggled as it swirled around her fingers like smoke. Her parents, who had brought her to the academy in desperation after her gift manifested, watched with tears in their eyes. Thank you, her father said to Lyra, for giving her a future, for making it so she'll never have to hide who she is. Lyra touched his shoulder gently. Thank you for bringing her here, for choosing to see her gift as something to nurture rather than suppress. That takes courage, too. The party continued late into the night, and when Lyra finally retired to the royal chambers, exhausted but content, she found Kale already there, sitting by the window where she'd once spoken to the shadows in those early, uncertain days. Do you ever think about the basement? He asked as she settled beside him. About who you were before all this. Lyra considered the question. Sometimes, but not with pain anymore. That scared, broken Omega, she was surviving the only way she knew how. She was protecting a gift she didn't understand. keeping it alive until she found somewhere safe to let it bloom. I honor her, but I'm not her anymore. Kel pulled her close, careful of her belly. You're the strongest wolf I know, the bravest, the wisest, and you're about to be an incredible mother. Lyra leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of the mate bond that had become as natural as breathing. We're going to be incredible parents, she corrected. Together. Like everything else. The shadows in the room stirred, and the umbral kindred's voices came soft and approving. The speaker and the sunwalker, the bridge between worlds. You have done well, little one. The balance holds, and it will hold for generations because of what you built here. Your children will carry both gifts, both light and shadow, and they will be stronger for it. The world is better, because you refuse to let others define your worth. Lyra smiled, placing her hand over Kale's where it rested on her belly. Their children would grow up in a world where gifts were celebrated, where being different meant being special, rather than being broken. They would never know the pain of hiding who they were, of being called crazy for abilities others simply didn't understand. And if the balance ever threatened to tip again, they would have the tools, the knowledge, and the support to restore it. As she drifted off to sleep in her mate's arms, surrounded by the shadows that had been her first friends and the light that had shown her she was never actually broken, Lyra thought about the girl she'd been and the queen she'd become. The journey from that cold basement to this warm palace hadn't just been about physical location. It had been about learning that the things that made her different were exactly what the world needed. That her voice, speaking to shadows, had been trying to tell her something important all along. You are enough. You are powerful. You are exactly who you were meant to be. And in the darkness, in the spaces between light and shadow, in the balance that she and Kyle had fought so hard to restore and maintain, the umbral kindred kept watch. The ancient ones who had chosen a frightened Omega and seen a queen, who had whispered warnings through the darkness and helped save the world. They would guard her children as they had guarded her, would continue their eternal vigil, would ensure that the balance held. Because some gifts, the truly important ones, they don't break you. They just take time to understand. And when you finally do, when you find the people who see your truth and help you rise to meet it, you discover that what everyone called madness was actually magic all along. The Alpha King had found her talking to shadows, and realized they were talking back. And in that moment of recognition, of truly seeing and being seen, everything had changed. Not just for Lyra, but for the entire world. If you enjoyed this story of finding power in what others feared, and discovering that true love means being seen for exactly who you are, please like this video and subscribe for more supernatural romance stories. Comment below about your favorite moment, whether you believe gifts should be celebrated rather than hidden, and what you think Lyra and Kale's twins will be like. Your support means everything and helps us continue bringing you stories about characters who refuse to be defined by others' limitations. Thank you for reading, and remember, your differences might just be your greatest strengths waiting to be discovered.